This video has been annotated to present character detail.
After a long time away, it's really time to return to the Riddle of Steel. And I'm sitting here this afternoon while I'm supposed to be doing something else and making characters. I like to make characters to understand a system, and I went through this process months ago, and now when I look at the characters, you know, the system detail isn't sticking in my head, so it's time to go through the character creation process again to revive that understanding of the rules. Character creation in the Riddle of Steel is spread across a couple of chapters. So chapter 2 is the meat of it in terms of the process. Chapter 1 is to understand that meat. Chapter 3 is where all the specifics are, really. And then chapter 7 is actually your starting point. So when you look at it that way, the layout of the book is kind of confused. And as a newcomer, if your intent was to sit down, make a character, and then figure out how the game works, it will be frustrating. So this is one of those books where you should sit down with the book and read it from cover to cover, and then say, okay, now I'm going to make a character. Because this is how it works. Before you go to chapter 2 and figure out, the skeleton of your character, you need to know where they're from. And where they're from is detailed in chapter 7, where they talk about all the nations of Werth. And they're pretty cool. And there are some that are thinly disguised, or not really disguised, analogs to countries from our past. And then there are purely fantastical nations, and they're all kind of salted around each other to give you multiple points of access that you can, as a newcomer, easily get into the game. You can choose a nation that you get, such as the Highlands of Scotland. You understand how historical Scotland was, or at least you have a good feel for it, and you start there and spread out, learn more about the world through that window or that access point. I think that's a good idea, especially with what this game is trying to accomplish. But all of that information is in chapter 7. And that really is the true starting point. Because before you put any information down on paper, your character needs to have a guiding philosophy, a way that they view and interact with the world. Without that guiding philosophy, you're not playing in the spirit of the game. There's no hand going to rise out of the page and choke you for not doing it. But it will matter in terms of whether or not you really played this game. So, you need to know where they're from. So you need to read chapter 7. Chapter 7 is an interesting read, so no harm, no foul. But it does mean, book flipping if you're going to sit down with people who don't have the book, who haven't had the opportunity to read through it, and they're going to learn about it through you as a filter. You're going to be flipping a lot. Keep that in mind. The book also talks a lot about having the players come together and talk about who they want to play and figuring out how to make all of that fit together with the blessing of the seneschal, or GM. So it's a classic approach to collaborative design. It's one I recommend pretty regularly on this channel. This is not the sort of game where you sit down, you bang out a 5-minute character, and they leave the farm and go on an adventure. It's not that game. The characters, while they don't need detailed backgrounds in terms of events that happened to them prior to play, in fact, I think that would be detrimental, they do need to have well-developed personalities and outlooks, because that's where the game is going. That's the stuff that really brings this system to life. So avoiding first this happened to my character, then that happened to my character, and oh, lo, there was a prophecy, all that stuff. Leave all that stuff behind and figure out, through whose eyes are you going to be looking. So you develop your philosophy, you know where you're from, and then you go to chapter 2 and focus on the priorities. And the priorities, to To assess and assign are for race, because there are races other than human in the Riddle of Steel. Social class, such as, are you landed nobility, or all the way down to the bottom, are you some form of slave? Attributes, skills, right? And each of those are their own distinct priority to assign. Then we get into proficiencies, which deals with weapons, and vagaries, which deals with sorceress ability, and those occupy the same column. And gifts and flaws. So if you were going to design a knight, you choose proficiencies, and if you were going to design a sorcerer, you choose vagaries. And gifts and flaws, the higher the priority, the better the gift, the weaker the flaw, and the opposite is true. So as your priority gets pushed down for gifts and flaws, it's interesting to recognize what kind of choices you're going to have to make. And really the whole thing is like that. It doesn't feel like Point Buy does, where you're slowly allocating resources across the character and you can nudge things in a very granular fashion. These are big jumps. Priority A is significantly better than priority B, which is significantly better than priority C. And so as you move down, the character is taking shape in these kind of rough jumps. And it's compelling. It forces you to make decisions about who this character is as a person. So I enjoyed that. Going through character creation the first time, I didn't enjoy a lot, to be honest. Going through and reading all the different skills, and in order to understand the skills, you need to understand the system. So every time you come back to this game, it really means reading through the system chapter, getting familiar with that again, remembering what the skills and proficiencies, how they work, and then building your characters. The end result is worth it, the process. If you spend your time thinking about who your character is, the process is enjoyable. If you're in a rush to get to play, it's going to be annoying. And there are a lot of systems like that. So, again, no harm, no foul. So, I had to make a decision. So I thought when I designed a character this time, I was going to go for a knight, because one of the things I really want to mess with is, as detailed a combat as I can get out of the system. So I will go for the easiest way to make that happen. And I ended up deciding this time on a character from Stahl. I didn't do that the first time I chose another nation, but this time I'm going to go for Stahl. And therefore, I want to play a human. I want to have access to lots of fighting abilities, and I'll forego sorcery for another character. So that means I could put race as the last priority. I don't need that priority at all. I'm going to play a human. Class becomes important. So I need to be nobility for this character to make sense. And that means priority B or A. A is just too much of a sacrifice. Landed nobility, the rest of the character won't work. So I have to go with B. I'm also not very happy about having to put B in for social class, but in order, right? So it's all about these trade-offs. Who is this person? So class was priority B, landless nobility. For A, after much weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, went for proficiencies. I want to have a strong background in weapons training. And I see this character as a student, a lifelong student, someone of a very thoughtful and philosophical bent. However, due to the circumstances of birth, they have been immersed in this warrior culture. Wearing of armor, the use of sword and shield, the use of a variety of different weapons. It's all around them, and it's what shaped their worldview. So, the next difficult choice is skills and gifts and flaws. Where do they come? So, in the end, the character went like this. Priority A for proficiencies. Priority B for social class, landless nobility. Priority C for attributes, painful. Priority D for skills, which gives him enough to take 2 different skill packets. So I focused on knight and academic, which will give him enough of the courtly skills to survive at court, but also make them rough around the edges in a way that I will enjoy. And then Gifts and Flaws is E, and Human for the final priority. So that's all right. So all of this stems out of the philosophy that I wanted to play. I didn't have any idea for a character in mind until I made the philosophy, and this is part of what we're going for. So I liked the idea of, in a world as such as described when you read through Chapter 7 and other parts of the Riddle of Steel, I like the philosophy of this. Humanity falls when none are there to catch it. The character believes this, that we may aspire to greatness, but we will fail unless we surround ourselves with people who are, in that moment, on an upward path. I also wanted to express this as a code, something very distinct that someone who was raised as a knight might tell themselves. Because the philosophy itself will certainly guide action, but it won't respond to specific situations with clarity. We'd have to talk about it at the table, and sometimes I don't want to do that. I want things to just be understood. So the code that this character might live by is to defend the defenseless, to embody justice, and to set a positive example. So those are the things I thought through prior to making my priority selections. Now, after you set your priorities, then you go through the mechanics of putting the character on paper, setting down their attributes, and deciding exactly where your landless noble hails from and what it is that they're doing. Are they in court? Are they walking the earth or whatever? You need to choose your skills. You're given them in packet, so that's easy. When I dealt with Gifts and Flaws for this character, I made a mistake. And I chose priority E for Gifts and Flaws, which gives you a major flaw and a minor gift. And I started with the minor gift because they come first in the book. And then that minor got stuck in my head and I chose a minor flaw. So then when I went back over everything to check, I discovered I had shorted the process. But by that point, I really, really liked that minor flaw. It really informed a significant part of the character as I was imagining them. So I'm going to keep it. I'm going to run this particular character with a major flaw and a minor gift. And, well, that's life. Okay, so the minor gift I chose was accuracy. This is just an ability to adjust the hit location. And I chose the minor version of it. There's a major version of it, which is significantly better, but I don't have access to that. But I'll be satisfied with this. Being able to nudge the hit location a little bit, it's cool. I like stuff like that. The accidental minor flaw that I took was vow. I thought about this thoughtful character, this philosophical character, this warrior scholar, this knight academic. It would be fantastic to have a prohibition against killing, not violence. I picture this character as being knee-deep, face first up against the enemy, defending the defenseless, right? Embodying justice, right? Being a knight. He's in there with the rest of them. But a prohibition against killing, a vow not to kill, that will be tested all the time in the system and cause the character troubles, cause the character torments, and will eventually, I suppose, be worn down. I'll be forced to address it. I'll be forced to buy off the flaw, and something else will happen. The character will evolve as a result of this. And so that led me to what major flaw I would take. I'd have to advance some of this a little bit. So in the game, there is a major or minor flaw called Tormented. And so I figure that the source of the vow to kill not will be the sense of guilt, the sense of torment. And I'm not going to flesh it out too much at the beginning. The character is tormented by it. They're agonized by it. This is something they don't talk about and don't share, and if I get a chance to play this character with a group, I'll want the seneschal at the very least to have a say in what the source of this torment is, but I'm going to give it a certain amount of shape. Right? So this major torment, the nightly, daily, constant pain in the back of his mind about this guilt, will lead to this vow. Okay, so the character will not kill. Now, tormented as a major flaw is a major flaw. This game doesn't mess around with its majors and minors, right? Flaws are bad. Gifts are good. Major things, really good. Minor things, just good. So the major flaw of Tormented has a serious impact on the character's spiritual attributes. Serious impact. But we'll get into that another time when we see the character in action. So, with an A in Proficiencies, you wind up with a lot of points to mess around. You can have a lot of weapon proficiencies. And one other thing that I like about the system is that you're not being pigeonholed. Well, you know how to use the longsword and nothing else, unless you want to pay more points. Everything is detailed on how knowledge of this weapon can bleed into knowledge of the others. So that's quite nice. And there's hints of Shadowrun in there, you know, with the original skill webs and things. So that's quite nice. So you can spread yourself out and have training in this weapon and this very different weapon, and they'll kind of meet in the middle somewhere and decide how it is that your character is going to approach combat, and then sort out exactly, you know, what their values are, how well they use a particular weapon. So that's quite nice, and you get a very clear sense of their fighting style. And then you go through and do the same thing with your skill packets and sort out what your ratings are there. And first couple of times that you do that, it's time intensive, easier with a character sheet than, you know, on a legal pad like I'm using. But I like to make notes as I go through. I like to do character creation on a legal pad. So, character creation, I think if you're familiar with it, if you're playing this game a lot, if you're getting yourself killed a lot, would get pretty easy. You would not have to access Chapter 7. You would not have to access much of Chapter 3 unless you're picking something that you hadn't ever used before. So really it would be deciding the priorities. And what am I going to play this time? How is it going to fit into the group? So it becomes a very organic process after that, I think. And while there can be a lot of similarity if you choose between characters, the process of character creation actively works against that. So while you might all be repeatedly making lots and lots of knights from Stahl over and over and over again, having to think about what their philosophy is, keeping in-game events in mind, you know, what has happened since play started, all these things will factor in and, you know, push and pull the character in different ways. So that's quite nice. There are aspects of this that could be refined. It's very text heavy. It goes through and it's just talking to you, do this, and there are rules which are buried in the text, which you have to look for. Rules is kind of a strong word, but you know, there are details in paragraphs. But then again, it would be very, very dry if they took the extreme other approach. So yeah, basically I enjoyed going through doing character creation, and look forward to the next stages. So this long overdue video is a quick look at character creation. Remember, this particular look at Riddle of Steel is not going to go as in-depth as others we have done, because it's part of a much longer series which will connect to 2 other games. So bear with me as time passes us all by. See you next time.